Have you ever walked away from a conversation with a strange ache in your chest, a quiet heaviness you could not quite name? Not because someone yelled at you, not because someone insulted you, but because something felt wrong, like the words you heard and the energy you received were living on two completely different frequencies. Maybe it was a friend who told you everything was fine, while their eyes drifted somewhere far away. Maybe it was a partner who promised to show up, but always seemed to find a reason not to. Maybe it was a coworker who praised you in front of others, but subtly took credit when it mattered most. And here is the part that stings. You did not catch it at first. You trusted the words. You believed the smile. You gave the benefit of the doubt because that is what kind, decent people do. And by the time you realize the truth, you are already standing in the wreckage, asking yourself a devastating question. How did I not see this coming? If that question has ever echoed in your mind at 3 a.m, you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not broken. You are not stupid. You are not too trusting, too naive, or too emotional. You simply were never taught the language that human beings actually speak, the one that has nothing to do with words. Here is a truth that might shift everything for you. People do not reveal who they are through what they say. They reveal who they are through what they repeatedly do, through how they respond when plans fall apart, through what they choose when nobody is watching, through the silence they leave behind after a question they do not want to answer. This is not about becoming suspicious of everyone. This is not about building walls so thick that love cannot reach you. This is about something far more beautiful and far more powerful than that. This is about developing a kind of vision, a warm, grounded, compassionate clarity that allows you to see people as they truly are, not as you hope they will be, not as they promise to become, but as they show themselves in the quiet, unscripted moments of everyday life. And once you develop that vision, something remarkable happens. The confusion lifts. The overthinking slows down. The exhausting cycle of replaying conversations at midnight begins to fade. Not because people suddenly become easier to understand, but because you finally have the tools to read the story their behavior has been telling all along. Think of it this way. Imagine you have been trying to read a book in a dark room for years, squinting, guessing at words, filling in blanks with your imagination, and then someone gently turns on the light. The book does not change. The words were always there, but now you can actually see them. That is what understanding human behavior feels like. It is not about changing the world around you. It is about finally being able to see it clearly. Throughout this journey together, we are going to walk through the hidden architecture of human behavior. We will explore why emotional reactions tell a more honest story than carefully chosen words. We will talk about why the space between what someone says and what someone does is the most important territory to watch. We will look at why pressure, not comfort, reveals what a person is actually made of. But here is the promise I want to make to you right now. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about losing your warmth, your empathy, or your beautiful ability to care about people. In fact, it is the opposite. When you stop misreading people, you stop getting hurt by misunderstandings that were never misunderstandings at all. You stop draining your energy trying to decode behavior that was actually quite clear. And you free yourself to invest your love, your time, and your trust in people who genuinely deserve it. So take a breath. Settle in. Let the ideas land softly. This is not a lecture. Think of it as a long, honest conversation between two friends sitting on a rooftop somewhere, watching the city lights flicker below, talking about the things we all feel but rarely say out loud. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Role Everyone Rehearses. Here's something most people never stop to consider. The person standing in front of you, the one laughing at your joke, agreeing with your opinion, nodding along to your story, may not be showing you who they actually are. They may be showing you who they have learned to be. This is not a cynical observation. It is a compassionate one. Because the truth is, almost everyone is performing to some degree, and most of them do not even realize it. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this starts much earlier than you might think. Picture a small child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, standing in a living room. She has just said something honest, something unfiltered, the way children do. Maybe she told a guest that their cooking tasted strange. Maybe she said she did not want to hug someone. Maybe she cried because she was overwhelmed and did not have the vocabulary to explain it. And what happened next shaped everything. A look of disapproval, a sharp correction, a subtle withdrawal of warmth. The message, delivered without words, was unmistakable. That version of you is not welcome here. So the child did what every intelligent, adaptive human being does. She adjusted. She watched. She experimented. She learned which behaviors earned approval and which ones earned rejection. Over time, those adjustments stopped feeling like adjustments. They became automatic. They hardened into habits. And eventually, those habits became something she called her personality. Now multiply that process across decades of social conditioning, school, friendships, workplaces, romantic relationships, and you begin to see the full picture. What most people present to the world is not a lie, exactly. It is a carefully curated collection of responses designed to ensure one thing above all else: belonging. And here is where it gets interesting. Every room rewards a different performance. In the office, people learn that confidence gets promoted even when that confidence is hollow. In friendships, people discover that agreeableness keeps the peace, even when agreement means silencing their real opinions. In romantic relationships, people figure out that being easygoing attracts partners, even when they are burning with unexpressed needs. So people shapeshift. They adjust their vocabulary depending on who is listening. They soften their edges in some rooms and sharpen them in others. They laugh at jokes they do not find funny. They express enthusiasm they do not feel. They swallow opinions that might create friction. This is not manipulation. Let me be very clear about that. This is survival. Human beings are wired for connection the way lungs are wired for oxygen. Social rejection does not just hurt emotionally, it registers in the brain with the same intensity as physical pain. So, of course, people adapt. Of course they perform. The cost of authenticity in many environments is simply too high. But here is the problem. When performance becomes habitual, something important gets lost. The performer forgets they are performing. The mask fuses with the face. And the person who started out adjusting to survive ends up genuinely believing that the adjusted version is who they really are. This is why you can know someone for years and still be surprised by who they become under stress. You were not seeing them. You were seeing the role they had perfected, and roles crack under pressure, which we will explore later. But for now, the critical insight is this. What you encounter in most social interactions is not raw, unfiltered humanity. It is a presentation, a rehearsed version of someone, polished for the room they are standing in, why listening to words alone will mislead you. Now, here is where this understanding becomes practical. If people are performing, then what is the most controlled part of any performance? The script? The words? Think about it. When someone tells you who they are, what are they actually doing? They are offering you their preferred narrative. They are describing the version of themselves they want you to believe in. They are handing you a story, and like all stories, it has been edited. People describe their intentions, not their patterns. They tell you what they value, not what they consistently choose. They explain their actions in ways that protect their self-image, because the alternative, admitting that their behavior contradicts their beliefs, is psychologically unbearable for most people. This is not deception in the traditional sense. Most people genuinely believe the story they are telling. They believe they are loyal because loyalty is something they value. They believe they are honest because honesty is something they admire. The gap between what they believe about themselves and what they consistently do is invisible to them, hidden behind a wall of justification and good intention. But that gap is not invisible to you, not anymore. Here is a small example that might feel familiar. Think of someone in your life who says they value communication. They talk about how important it is to be open, to share feelings, to work through problems together. Beautiful words, admirable values. Now ask yourself, when a difficult conversation actually needs to happen, what do they do? Do they lean in, or do they disappear? Do they bring it up, or do they wait until you do and then treat your need to talk as an inconvenience? That gap, the distance between the stated value and the lived behavior, is where truth lives. And noticing it does not make you judgmental. It makes you observant. The quiet confession of repeated behavior. So if words are unreliable narrators, what can you actually trust? The answer is beautifully simple. Patterns. Behavior that repeats is behavior that reveals. Not the grand gestures, not the dramatic moments, but the small, quiet, consistent ways a person shows up or does not, day after day after day. Think of behavior like water flowing over stone. A single drop means nothing. But over time, water carves canyons. It is the repetition that matters, the accumulation, the patient, relentless showing up of the same response to the same type of situation. How does someone respond when they do not get what they want? That is revealing. How does someone treat you when they are tired and have nothing to gain from being kind? That is revealing. How does someone behave when they think no one important is paying attention? That is the most revealing of all. These moments do not come with announcements. They do not arrive wearing signs that say, "Pay attention, this is the real me." They are mundane. They are ordinary. They happen on a Tuesday afternoon when someone is distracted and their usual mask slips just slightly. And in that slight slip, you see something true. Here is what makes this powerful. Behavior is difficult to fake over time. You can rehearse a conversation. You can prepare a speech. You can practice an apology until it sounds flawless. But you cannot rehearse thousands of small daily interactions. Eventually, the default setting shows through, and the default setting is the person, the comfort trap of believing the performance. Now, I want to be honest with you about something because this is where it gets emotionally complicated. Part of you does not want to see the patterns. Part of you prefers the performance, and that is okay. That is not weakness. That is your heart doing what hearts do, reaching for hope, believing the performance is comfortable. It keeps the peace. It preserves the relationship as you wish it were. It allows you to avoid the painful conclusion that someone you care about may not be who they presented themselves to be. But this comfort has a cost, and the cost is always the same. When you believe the role instead of watching the pattern, you set yourself up for a moment of reckoning, a moment when reality breaks through, suddenly and painfully, even though the signs were there all along, patient and quiet, waiting to be acknowledged. The goal is not to become someone who doubts everything. The goal is to become someone who trusts wisely, someone who gives people the space to reveal themselves through their actions before deciding how much access they deserve. Watching without judging. The art of gentle observation. Here is the part that changes everything. You do not need to confront. You do not need to accuse. You do not need to announce what you have noticed or demand an explanation. You simply need to watch. Watch what happens when the script breaks down. Watch how someone behaves when a plan changes unexpectedly. Watch what stays consistent when the audience shifts from friends to strangers, from superiors to subordinates. Real character does not perform well under improvisation. When the rehearsed lines run out and someone has to respond from instinct, you see the person underneath the presentation. And here is the beautiful part. When you develop this kind of observation, something shifts inside you. You become calmer. The frantic need to analyze every conversation, to replay every interaction, to decode every tone of voice, it quiets down because you are no longer trying to figure people out through their words. You are letting their behavior speak. And behavior, given enough time, always tells the truth. You stop asking, why did they say that, and start noticing what they consistently do. You stop chasing reassurance and start trusting repetition. You stop demanding clarity from conversations and start finding it in patterns. This does not make you cold. It makes you grounded. It allows you to engage with people without illusion, to connect without self-deception, to remain warm without being blindsided. Because in a world where nearly everyone is performing, the person who can see past the performance gently, without bitterness, without superiority, is the person who finally stops being confused by people. And that quiet understanding, that compassionate clarity, is the foundation for everything we are going to build together. The space between what people say and what people do is not a void. It is a library, and you are about to learn how to read every book on the shelf. When a comment, a delay, a boundary, or a disagreement produces an emotional reaction that feels larger than the situation warrants, you are not witnessing irrationality. You are witnessing the past colliding with the present. The person standing in front of you is not fully responding to you. They are partially responding to someone who is not even in the room anymore, a critical parent, an ex-partner, a childhood bully, a version of themselves they never made peace with. This is why some reactions feel so baffling. The situation is a 2 out of 10. The emotional response is an 8. That mismatch is not random. It is a signpost pointing directly to unfinished emotional business. And here is why this matters for you. When you understand that someone's reaction often has very little to do with you, you gain something precious. You gain the ability to not take it personally. Not because their reaction does not affect you, it might, but because you can see clearly that the fire was burning long before you walked into the room. You did not start it. You just happened to step close enough to feel the heat. Defensiveness, the guard dog of identity. If emotional reactions are windows, defensiveness is a deadbolt lock. It tells you exactly where someone does not want you to look. Pay attention the next time someone becomes defensive, not angry necessarily, but defensive. The shifting eyes, the rapid justification, the sudden need to explain something that nobody accused them of. The subtle redirection of the conversation away from the uncomfortable point and toward safer ground. What you are witnessing is not someone protecting the truth. You are witnessing someone protecting a story they tell themselves about who they are. And that story is shaking. A person who cannot tolerate a gentle question about their behavior is not guarding facts. They are guarding a self-image. A person who responds to mild feedback with an avalanche of context, excuses, and counter-accusations is not clarifying the situation. They are trying to stabilize an identity that your words just destabilized. This does not make them bad. It makes them human. We all have narratives about who we are, and most of us feel a tremor when those narratives are challenged. The difference lies in degree. A person with a stable sense of self can absorb a question without crumbling. A person with a fragile sense of self experiences that same question as an existential threat. When you notice defensiveness, you are standing at the edge of someone's self-concept. Treat it with care. You do not need to push. You do not need to prove your point. You simply need to note what you see. That information will serve you far more than any argument ever could. The quiet ones. What withdrawal really means. Not every emotional reaction arrives with volume. Some of the most powerful reactions are silent ones. Some people, when they feel overwhelmed, hurt, or exposed, do not explode. They vanish. They go quiet. They retreat behind a wall of distance so smooth and well constructed that it almost looks like indifference. But it is not indifference. It is almost never indifference. Withdrawal is usually a strategy learned very early in life, often in homes where expressing emotion was unsafe, where showing vulnerability led to punishment, dismissal, or shame. The nervous system learned a simple equation: feelings equal danger. And so, it built an exit door. When someone withdraws instead of communicating, what you are seeing is not a lack of caring. You are seeing someone whose emotional emergency response is to disappear, because at some point in their history, disappearing was the safest option available. This is important because withdrawal is one of the most commonly misread behaviors. The partner who goes silent after a disagreement is often perceived as cold, punishing, or passive-aggressive. And sometimes that perception might carry some truth. But far more often, the silence is a cocoon, a protective space where someone retreats because the emotional temperature exceeded what their system can process. Again, understanding this does not mean accepting it without boundaries. Withdrawal that becomes a pattern of avoidance still needs to be addressed. But understanding the engine behind the behavior changes how you address it. You approach with curiosity instead of accusation. And curiosity opens doors that accusation slams shut. Chapter 3. Everything that lives in the spaces between words. Now, let us shift gears. Let us talk about a form of communication so powerful that most people completely overlook it, even though it is happening in every single interaction they have. Chapter 2. What emotions accidentally confess. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you are sitting across from someone at a small cafe table, the kind of place where the espresso machine hisses in the background and the afternoon light comes through the window at just the right angle. You are having a perfectly normal conversation. Everything is calm, everything is measured, and then, almost out of nowhere, you say something, maybe a simple observation, maybe a gentle question, and the person across from you changes. Their jaw tightens, their eyes narrow, their voice shifts from relaxed to razor sharp in less than a second. The response they give is 3 times bigger than the moment deserves. And just like that, in a flash of unguarded emotion, you see something they have probably spent years trying to keep hidden. That flash, that is the most honest thing they have shown you all day. Here is a truth that most people overlook because it feels counterintuitive. Calm, composed conversations rarely reveal who someone truly is. It is the moments when composure breaks, when emotion surges past the mental filters and spills out before the mind can catch it, that a person's inner architecture becomes visible. Emotional reactions are not noise. They are signal. They are the psychological equivalent of a window flying open during a storm, giving you a clear, unobstructed view into rooms that are usually locked and curtained. Now, most people make a mistake here. They see an emotional reaction and they judge it. They label it as dramatic, inappropriate, or over the top. And then they move on without asking the one question that actually matters. What is that reaction protecting? Because here is what psychology teaches us. Every disproportionate emotional reaction is a bodyguard standing in front of something vulnerable, something that feels threatened, something that needs defending. And if you learn to look past the bodyguard and see what it is guarding, you will understand that person more deeply than years of conversation could ever offer. The honest language of overreaction. Think about the last time someone reacted to you in a way that felt completely out of proportion. Maybe you offered a small piece of feedback and they responded as though you had attacked their entire identity. Maybe you set a simple boundary and they erupted as if you had declared war. Maybe you asked a harmless question and they shut down like a vault door slamming closed. In those moments, the natural instinct is to focus on the reaction itself, to think, why are they being so dramatic? But the far more useful question is, what did my words accidentally touch? Because here is what is happening beneath the surface. When someone explodes over something minor, the explosion is not about the minor thing. It is about something older, deeper, and far more tender. Your words, without meaning to, brushed against an old wound, an unresolved fear, a fragile piece of identity that they have been carefully protecting, sometimes for decades. A person who reacts with intense anger when you question their judgment is not angry about your question. They are protecting a sense of competence that feels unstable. A person who becomes ice cold when you express a need is not indifferent. They are retreating from a vulnerability that feels dangerous. A person who lashes out when you succeed is not cruel. They are struggling with a sense of inadequacy that your success accidentally illuminated. This does not excuse harmful behavior. Let me be clear about that. Understanding the root of a reaction does not mean tolerating its damage, but it does give you something invaluable. It gives you the ability to see the person behind the reaction. And when you see the person behind the reaction, you stop being confused by it. Where calm statements fall short. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. When someone speaks to you calmly about their values, their beliefs, their character, they are showing you the portrait they have painted of themselves. It is curated. It is intentional. It is the version they want hanging on the gallery wall. But when that same person reacts emotionally, when they are caught off guard by jealousy, stung by criticism, rattled by rejection, the portrait falls off the wall, and behind it, scratched into the plaster, is something far more authentic. Think about the friend who talks endlessly about how secure they are in their relationship, and then panics when their partner is 20 minutes late responding to a text. The composed exterior says confidence. The reaction says fear of abandonment. Which one is more honest? The one that was not planned. Or consider the colleague who presents themselves as open-minded and receptive to feedback, and then spends an hour after a performance review explaining why every piece of criticism was unfair. The words say growth. The reaction says fragility. Again, the unscripted moment wins. This is not about catching people in weakness. This is about understanding where their true emotional center of gravity lies. Because the distance between what someone says they feel and what they actually feel when the moment arrives is one of the most illuminating measurements in human behavior. Reading triggers like a compass. Let me offer you a metaphor that might make this easier to hold on to. Think of emotional triggers as compass needles. They do not point north randomly. They point toward unresolved territory, places inside a person where healing has not finished, where old stories are still running, where pain from the past is still silently organizing behavior in the present. Silence. Most people treat silence the way they treat an empty room, as something that needs to be filled. The moment a conversation pauses, the instinct kicks in. Fill it. Say something, explain, joke, reassure, anything to break the stillness. But what if silence is not empty at all? What if silence is actually one of the most information-rich moments in any human exchange? Think about it like this. Imagine a river with water running over rocks. The water is conversation, the words, the explanations, the stories. Now imagine the water suddenly stops. What do you see? You see the rocks. You see the shape of the riverbed. You see what was always there underneath, hidden by the constant flow. That is what silence does. It reveals the landscape beneath the words. When someone stops speaking, when conversation pauses and the air goes still, something fascinating happens. The performance machinery has nothing to work with. There is no script to follow, no line to deliver, no narrative to maintain. And in that gap, the nervous system speaks instead. Through posture, through breathing, through eye contact or the avoidance of it, through the fidgeting hands that reveal discomfort or the steady stillness that reveals ease. Silence is not the absence of communication. Silence is communication with the volume turned down low enough that you have to actually pay attention to hear it. the psychological weight of an unanswered moment. Here is something that negotiators, therapists, and seasoned observers have understood for a long time. Silence creates a gentle kind of pressure, not aggressive pressure, not manipulative pressure, but the natural psychological weight of an unanswered moment. When you ask a question and then simply wait, without rushing to rephrase it, without filling the pause with nervous energy, something beautiful and revealing happens. People begin to fill the silence themselves, and what they fill it with is often far more honest than anything they would have said if you had kept the conversational ball bouncing. They offer information they were not asked for. They explain things that no one accused them of. They reveal priorities, anxieties, and preoccupations that were hidden beneath the surface of polite conversation. Not because you pressured them, but because the silence gave the truth room to rise. Think of silence like gently lowering the water level in a swimming pool. You are not forcing anything to the surface. You are simply removing what was covering it, and whatever emerges, emerges on its own. This is why the most insightful people in any room are rarely the ones talking the most. They are the ones comfortable enough with stillness to let it do its work. What someone's relationship with silence tells you about them. Pay attention to how people handle quiet moments, because it will tell you a remarkable amount about their internal state. Some people settle into silence like sinking into a warm bath. They are present, they are relaxed, their body language stays open. They do not rush to fill the space. These people generally have a stable relationship with themselves. They do not need external noise to feel secure. They are comfortable with their own thoughts, which means they are comfortable with who they are when no one is watching. Other people treat silence like a ticking clock. The moment conversation pauses, you can almost see the anxiety rise. They talk faster, they over-explain, they ask questions not because they want answers, but because they want the silence to stop. These people are often managing how they are perceived, and silence removes their ability to do that. Without words, they lose their steering wheel, and losing control of how they come across feels genuinely unsafe to them. Neither response is inherently good or bad, but both are deeply informative. The person who is comfortable with silence is telling you something about their self-trust. The person who cannot tolerate it is telling you something about their dependence on external validation. And then there is a third category, one worth watching carefully. There are people who use silence strategically. Silence as punishment, silence as control, silence as withdrawal of affection designed to provoke anxiety in someone else. This is not the same as quiet presence. This is absence wearing silence as a costume. The distinction matters enormously. Silence that comes from groundedness feels calm and connective. Silence that comes from strategy feels heavy and unsettling. Your body usually knows the difference before your mind catches up. Trust that instinct. The power of not rushing to respond. Here is a small experiment you can try, not to manipulate anyone, but to experience the power of silence for yourself. The next time someone says something that would normally make you react, pause, just for a few seconds. Do not formulate your response. Do not prepare your rebuttal. Do not plan your next sentence. Just let the moment sit in the air like a leaf that has just fallen from a branch. Notice what happens. Notice how the other person responds to that pause. Notice how your own nervous system settles when you give it permission to not react immediately. That pause, that small, deliberate pocket of stillness, changes the entire dynamic of a conversation. It moves you from reactive to observant. It shifts you from participant to witness. And from that witnessing position, you see things that the reactive version of you would have completely missed. You notice the micro-expression that flickers across someone's face when they think you are not formulating a response. You catch the slight shift in posture that reveals discomfort. You hear the words they add when they think the silence needs filling, words they would never have offered if the conversation had kept moving at full speed. Silence is not a weapon. It is a lens. And like any good lens, it brings things into focus that were always there but too blurred by noise to see. When you stop filling silence, you stop carrying conversations. There is a quieter, more personal gift that comes from learning to be comfortable with silence. You stop exhausting yourself. Think about how much energy goes into keeping conversations alive, the constant monitoring, the social calibrating, the endless effort to make sure nobody feels uncomfortable, to keep the flow going, to manage impressions, yours and theirs. When you allow silence to exist without treating it as an emergency, you release yourself from the unspoken obligation to be the emotional engine of every interaction. You let responsibility become shared. You let the other person carry their half. And in that sharing, something beautiful happens. The interaction becomes more honest. Because now, both people are present. Both people are contributing. Neither person is performing for the other. And you discover something that might surprise you. The conversations that include silence, that breathe, that have space between the words, are often the deepest and most meaningful ones you will ever have. Because in that space, truth has room to sit down and stay a while. The observer who hears what words cannot say. In a world that never stops talking, the ability to sit quietly without discomfort is more than rare. It is revolutionary. The person who can be still in a room full of noise sees more than everyone else. They catch the things that speed and volume and constant chatter bury. They notice when someone's laughter does not reach their eyes. They feel the shift in energy when a topic touches a nerve. They sense the weight behind a pause that everyone else rushes past. This is not a superpower. This is a skill. And like every skill, it is built through practice. Practice sitting in silence without reaching for your phone. Practice listening without planning your response. Practice allowing the conversation to breathe without panicking about the pause. Over time, something shifts. You stop hearing only what people say. You start hearing what they mean. You start hearing what they are afraid to say. You start hearing the whole symphony, not just the melody, but the spaces between the notes where the real music lives. Because silence does not demand attention, it commands it. And once you learn to listen to what silence is telling you, you will hear truths that words were never brave enough to speak. Chapter 4. The Mirror That Other People Hold Up. There is a test that reveals more about a person's character than any conversation, any promise, or any grand gesture ever could. And the beautiful thing about this test is that it requires no setup, no confrontation, and no clever questions. It simply requires you to watch. Watch how someone treats the people who cannot do anything for them. That single observation, quiet and unassuming as it may seem, will tell you more about a human being than months of carefully curated interaction. Because when someone wants something from you, when they are motivated by attraction, opportunity, approval, or ambition, they are performing at their highest level. They are attentive, they are generous, they are warm, they are everything you could want a person to be. But that warmth is not character. That warmth is strategy. And strategy has an expiration date. The real question is never, how does this person treat me right now? The real question is, how does this person treat the people who hold no leverage over them? The barista who gets their order wrong on a busy morning. The elderly neighbor who talks a little too long. The customer service representative who cannot solve the problem fast enough. The old friend who no longer fits into their new social circle. These interactions are where the curtain drops. Because in those moments, there is nothing to gain, no impression to manage, no reward to chase, and whatever shows up in that space, kindness or contempt, patience or dismissal, is the person you are actually dealing with. Let me give you an image to carry with you. Think of someone's behavior toward people who cannot benefit them as a weather forecast for your future with that person. It may be sunny between you right now. The skies may be clear and warm. But if storms are already happening everywhere else they go, do not convince yourself that you are the exception. Weather patterns travel. It is only a matter of time before the clouds reach your door. The most dangerous sentence in any relationship. There is a sentence that has quietly cost people years of their life, years of emotional investment poured into relationships that were always going to disappoint. And the sentence sounds so reasonable, so hopeful, that most people never question it. They are different with me. Oh, how the heart wants to believe that. How comforting it is to think that you have unlocked some special version of this person, a version that the rest of the world does not get to see. That you are the exception to their pattern, that your presence transforms them into someone better, kinder, more consistent than they are with everyone else. But here is what experience teaches, gently and sometimes painfully. Adaptation is not transformation. People absolutely adjust their behavior based on context. They show you their most polished side when the relationship is new, when the stakes are high, when they are still earning your trust. But adjustment has a shelf life, and underneath every adjustment, the core pattern remains, patient and unchanging, waiting for familiarity or stress to bring it back to the surface. If someone regularly dismisses other people, that dismissiveness lives inside them. It does not disappear because you are in the room. It waits. It waits for the moment when you are no longer new, when the effort of maintaining the performance outweighs the reward, when comfort replaces courtship. And then, slowly or suddenly, the behavior that was always there begins to visit your doorstep too. This is not pessimism. This is pattern recognition. And pattern recognition, done with a gentle heart, is one of the most loving things you can do for yourself. Listening to how people narrate others. Here is another observation tool that costs nothing and reveals everything. Pay attention to how someone talks about people who are not in the room. This is a backstage pass to their psychology, because the way someone describes others is not just information about those other people. It is a projection of their internal world, their values, their insecurities, and most importantly, the lens through which they will eventually see you. Does this person speak about others with generosity, even when recounting conflicts? Or do they paint themselves as the perpetual hero of every story, surrounded by villains who wrong them without reason? Do they protect the privacy of people who trusted them? Or do they trade in secrets the way some people trade in currency, spending them freely to purchase attention and social connection? These are not small details. These are rehearsals. Someone who mocks another person's vulnerability in your presence is rehearsing how they will handle yours. Someone who betrays a confidence to entertain you is practicing how they will treat your secrets when you become the subject of someone else's conversation. Someone who frames every past relationship as a tale of their own victimhood is building the narrative they will one day write about you. Pay attention to the stories people tell, not just what happened in them, but how the storyteller positions themselves. Do they ever take responsibility? Do they ever acknowledge their own contribution to a conflict? Or is every story a courtroom where they are always the innocent defendant? The answers to these questions do not require confrontation. They do not require follow-up questions or investigations. They simply require you to listen, really listen, not just to the content of what is being said, but to the architecture of how it is built. Where respect flows tells you everything about power. Let me share something with you that once you see it, you will never unsee it. Anyone can be respectful upward. That costs nothing and gains everything. Think about it. People are polite to their boss. They are accommodating to someone who controls their paycheck, their promotion, their social standing. They are careful with people who have the power to affect their outcomes. This tells you absolutely nothing about their character. It only tells you they understand leverage. What matters, what really truly matters, is how respect flows downward. How does someone treat the intern, the janitor, the person who made a mistake that has no consequences for anyone important, the waiter who brought the wrong dish, the child who interrupted an adult conversation? When someone is kind to a person they could easily dismiss, that kindness is real. When someone is patient with a person who cannot retaliate, that patience is genuine. When someone shows respect to a person who holds no power, that respect is character, not calculation. And the reverse is equally revealing. A person who is charming to their equals and dismissive to anyone below them is showing you exactly how they relate to power. They do not value people, they value utility. And the moment your utility decreases, your experience of them will change dramatically. Watch the direction respect flows. That current will tell you everything you need to know about the river. Why we ignore what we can already see. Now, here is the part where I need to be honest with you, gently but honestly. Sometimes the issue is not that you cannot see these patterns. Sometimes the issue is that you do not want to accept what they mean, because acceptance comes with a cost. If you accept that someone's behavior toward others predicts their behavior toward you, you might have to let go of a relationship you have invested in. If you acknowledge that someone's pattern of disrespect will eventually reach your door, you might have to revise the beautiful story you have written about your future together. If you see clearly that someone treats kindness as transactional, you might have to mourn the version of them you fell in love with. And mourning is painful. So the mind offers an alternative. It explains. It contextualizes. It rationalizes. They were just having a rough week. They did not really mean it like that. You are reading too much into it. These rationalizations are not stupidity. They are emotional self-preservation. The heart says, I am not ready to lose this, and the mind, ever loyal to the heart's wishes, builds a case for staying. But here's what I want you to hold on to. You can take your time. You do not have to act on every observation immediately. Clarity does not come with a deadline. What matters is that you stop denying what you see. Let the information exist inside you. Let it accumulate. Let the pattern become undeniable on its own terms. And when you are ready, when the weight of reality becomes heavier than the comfort of illusion, you will know what to do, not because someone told you, but because you allowed yourself to see. Chapter 5. The Noise That Insecurity Makes. Let me tell you something that might rearrange the way you see certain people in your life. The loudest person in the room is almost never the most confident. They are almost always the most afraid. This sounds backwards, does it not? We have been taught to associate volume with certainty, dominance with strength, unshakable opinions with deep knowledge. But human psychology tells a very different story. Confidence, real confidence, the kind that comes from a settled relationship with oneself, is one of the quietest forces on the planet. It does not announce itself. It does not compete for attention. It does not need to win every debate, correct every misunderstanding, or establish dominance in every room it enters. Confidence sits down, breathes, and lets the moment be what it is. It does not require agreement to feel stable. It does not need applause to feel valid. It can hold space for disagreement without interpreting it as an attack. Insecurity, on the other hand, is restless. It scans the room for threats. It measures itself against everyone else. It flinches at feedback and bristles at boundaries, and most importantly, it cannot stay hidden for long. No matter how well someone learns to dress it up, insecurity always leaks. It leaks through the need to control every conversation. It leaks through the compulsion to one-up someone else's story. It leaks through the subtle dismissal of another person's achievement. It leaks through the disproportionate reaction to a harmless question. It leaks through the restless, tireless effort to manage how other people perceive them. And once you learn to recognize the sound insecurity makes, you will hear it everywhere, not to judge it, but to understand the behavior it produces. The difference that changes everything. Here is a distinction that will serve you for the rest of your life. Confidence tolerates discomfort. Insecurity fights it. Watch what happens when someone encounters disagreement. A confident person can sit with it. They can say, I see it differently, and that is okay. They can hear criticism without crumbling. They can be questioned without feeling attacked. Their sense of self does not depend on everyone in the room agreeing with them. An insecure person cannot do this. Disagreement feels like rejection. Criticism feels like an assault. Being questioned feels like being diminished. Their internal stability depends on external consensus. And when that consensus breaks, even slightly, the reaction is immediate and often disproportionate. This is why insecurity so often masquerades as intensity. The rigid opinions, the loud certainty, the need to dominate a conversation, these are not signs of someone who knows who they are. They are signs of someone desperately trying to convince both you and themselves that they do. When control becomes the tell. One of the most reliable markers of insecurity is the need to control. And this control can wear many disguises. Sometimes it looks like micromanagement, the inability to let other people handle things without constant oversight. Sometimes it looks like conversational steering, always redirecting discussion back to topics where they feel dominant. Sometimes it looks like emotional regulation of others, needing everyone around them to feel a certain way so that they can feel safe. At its core, control is anxiety wearing a suit. It says, the world is unpredictable, and I cannot handle unpredictability. So instead of developing the internal resilience to ride the waves of uncertainty, the insecure person tries to eliminate the waves altogether. They try to flatten the ocean. And here is the thing about trying to flatten an ocean. It is exhausting. It is futile. And it is enormously revealing to anyone watching from the shore. When you notice someone gripping tightly to control, whether in a relationship, a workplace, or a social circle, you are not seeing strength. You are seeing fear. Fear that if things unfold naturally without their management, the outcome might expose something they are not ready to face. The comparison engine that never rests. Secure people can celebrate someone else's success without it diminishing their own. Insecure people cannot. For them, another person's achievement is not inspiration. It is a mirror, and not everyone is comfortable with what they see reflected back. Pay attention to how someone responds when good news belongs to someone else. Do they celebrate fully without qualifiers? Or do they redirect the conversation? Do they minimize the achievement? Do they find a subtle way to mention their own accomplishments, as if the spotlight must always return to them? These responses are rarely conscious. The insecure person does not sit down and plan to undermine someone else's moment. The reaction is automatic, driven by an internal comparison engine that is always running, always measuring, always asking, am I enough? And here is the compassionate truth behind that question. The comparison engine exists because at some point, probably long ago, someone or something taught that person that their worth was conditional, that they had to earn belonging through performance, that love was a competition. And even though that lesson may no longer match their reality, the engine keeps running, comparing, measuring, scoring. Understanding this allows you to see the behavior without being destabilized by it. When someone reacts to your success with subtle diminishment, it is not really about you. It is about a wound inside them that your success accidentally pressed on. You do not need to shrink yourself to accommodate that wound, but you also do not need to resent the person carrying it. Recognizing without diagnosing. Here is something important. You do not need to label people. You do not need to play psychologist, assign diagnoses, or deliver assessments of someone's inner landscape. That is not your job, and it is not your right. What you can do, and what serves you immensely, is notice patterns. Does this person consistently need to be right? Do they struggle when the attention is not on them? Do they react to minor challenges as though their entire identity is under siege? These observations do not require confrontation. They do not require you to sit someone down and say, I think you are insecure. That would be neither kind nor productive. What they do require is that you calibrate your expectations accordingly. You do not expect emotional steadiness from someone who has shown you emotional volatility. You do not expect graceful accountability from someone who has consistently deflected responsibility. You do not expect unconditional support from someone whose own sense of self depends on feeling superior. This is not cynicism. This is realism wrapped in compassion. You are not punishing anyone for their limitations. You are simply choosing not to be surprised by them. The steady ground you stand on. And here is where this all circles back to you. Because the greatest protection against being destabilized by someone else's insecurity is your own security. When you are grounded in who you are, when your sense of worth does not depend on someone else's approval, opinion, or reaction, insecurity becomes visible without being contagious. You can see it clearly without catching it. You can understand it deeply without being pulled into its orbit. You do not mirror intensity. You do not engage in comparison. You do not compete for validation. You remain steady. And that steadiness, that quiet, unmovable calm, is disarming. Not because it intimidates, but because it removes the fuel that insecure behavior runs on. Insecurity feeds on reaction. It thrives on engagement. It grows when met with equal intensity. But when met with calm, grounded presence, it has nothing to push against. And in that absence of resistance, it often quiets down on its own. This does not mean you ignore harmful behavior. It means you do not let it rearrange your internal furniture. You observe, you understand, you adjust your boundaries as needed, and you keep standing on the ground that belongs to you, because insecurity will always leak. That is its nature. But when you learn to recognize the leak, you stop stepping in the puddle. And dry shoes, my friend, make for a much more pleasant walk through life. Chapter 6. The Fire That Shows What Things Are Made Of. There is an old tradition among blacksmiths that carries a truth far beyond the forge. When a blacksmith wants to know the quality of a piece of metal, they do not examine it while it sits cool on the workbench. They thrust it into the fire, they heat it until it glows, they strike it with a hammer, and only then, under pressure and flame, does the metal reveal its true composition. Is it brittle? Is it flexible? Will it hold its shape or shatter into pieces? People work the same way. When life is comfortable, almost anyone can appear patient, generous, kind, and composed. Comfort is the great equalizer of human behavior. It smooths out the rough edges. It allows people to perform their best selves without much effort, because nothing is demanding anything different from them. But comfort is not a test. Comfort is a rehearsal in an empty theater. The real performance happens when the lights come on, the audience is watching, and the script falls apart. Pressure is that moment. Pressure is the flame in the forge, and what it reveals is not something new. It is something that was always there, hidden beneath the surface of easy days and unchallenged routines, waiting for a moment hot enough to bring it to the surface. This is why the most reliable way to understand someone is not to listen to what they say during a peaceful dinner. It is to watch what they do when the restaurant catches fire. What happens when the safety net disappears? Let me walk you through what actually happens inside the human brain when pressure arrives. Because understanding the mechanics makes the observation infinitely more useful. Under normal conditions, the brain operates with what you might call a management layer. This layer handles social awareness, impulse control, long-term thinking, and impression management. It is the part of you that pauses before speaking, considers consequences, and chooses diplomacy over honesty when the situation calls for it. But when pressure hits, when a deadline is crumbling, when a relationship is fracturing, when money is disappearing, when trust is breaking, that management layer starts to thin. The brain redirects energy away from careful consideration and toward survival instincts. And survival instincts do not care about politeness, image, or long-term strategy. They care about right now. This is why pressure makes people honest. Not because they choose honesty, but because they lose the energy required to maintain the performance. The filters come offline. The default programming takes over. And whatever that default programming looks like, whether it is calm problem-solving or frantic blame-shifting, that is the person you are actually dealing with. Some people become focused under pressure. They narrow their attention, communicate clearly, and move toward solutions with a kind of quiet determination that is genuinely beautiful to witness. These people have developed, either through experience or inner work, a stable core that holds steady when the world around them shakes. Other people fragment. They panic. They point fingers. They rewrite history in real time to protect their ego. They become controlling, aggressive, or emotionally volatile. And then, when the pressure passes, they return to their composed selves and expect everyone to forget what they revealed. But you do not forget, not because you hold grudges, but because you understand that the pressured version was not an aberration. It was a revelation, the crucible of conflict. If pressure is the forge, conflict is the hammer. And conflict, more than almost any other human experience, reveals how someone thinks when they feel threatened. Watch how someone argues, not what they argue about, but how they do it. This distinction matters enormously. Do they listen, or do they wait for their turn to speak? Do they seek understanding, or do they seek victory? Do they stay with the issue at hand, or do they reach backward into the archives, pulling out old grievances to use as ammunition? Do they regulate their voice, or do they let volume become their strategy? A person who can disagree without dehumanizing the other side possesses something rare and valuable. They can separate their identity from their opinion. They can hold their position without needing to demolish yours. They can sit inside the discomfort of disagreement without interpreting it as a personal attack. This ability, the capacity to remain a whole human being inside a conflict, is one of the clearest indicators of psychological maturity, and its absence is equally telling. People who cannot tolerate disagreement often experience opposition as abandonment. Somewhere inside them, a voice says, "If you disagree with me, you are against me, and if you are against me, I am not safe." Their reactions during conflict are not really about the issue. They are about the existential threat they feel underneath it. And that threat drives behavior that is outsized, irrational, and sometimes damaging, not because the person is malicious, but because their nervous system is treating a Tuesday afternoon disagreement like a fight for survival. When time squeezes, priorities surface. There is another form of pressure that reveals character with remarkable efficiency, and it is so commonplace that most people never think to observe it. Time pressure. When time is limited, people are forced to make choices, and choices reveal priorities with surgical precision. Watch what someone does when they have too much on their plate. Do they honor their commitments or quietly renegotiate without communication? Do they show up for the things they promised, or do they let obligations dissolve when no one holds them accountable? Do they manage their stress internally, or do they distribute it to everyone around them like a tax that others must pay for the privilege of being nearby? Someone who consistently follows through when life gets hectic is showing you something real about their character. Their reliability is not a performance that requires ideal conditions. It is a structural feature. It holds up under load. And someone who collapses under moderate pressure, who becomes unreliable, short-tempered, or avoidant the moment comfort disappears, is also showing you something real. Not that they are a bad person, but that their consistency depends on circumstances being favorable. And circumstances, as you know, are rarely favorable for long. The temptation to excuse what pressure reveals. Here is where I want to hold your hand for a moment, because this is one of the hardest truths in all of human observation. The temptation to excuse behavior that emerges under pressure is enormous. They were stressed. They had so much going on. They did not mean it. They are not usually like that. And you know what? All of those things might be true. Stress is real. Overwhelm is real. People absolutely say and do things under pressure that do not represent their highest self. But here is the critical distinction. Stress explains the context. It does not erase the content. If pressure consistently produces disrespect, avoidance, cruelty, or blame shifting, those responses are not glitches in the system. They are features of the system. They are the operating software that runs when the prettier interface crashes. A person who yells at their partner every time work gets difficult is not merely stressed. They are showing you that stress gives them permission to be unkind. A person who vanishes every time emotional labor is required is not simply overwhelmed. They are showing you that difficulty activates their exit strategy, not their engagement. Understanding the context does not require you to ignore the content. Both can be true simultaneously. You can acknowledge that someone was under enormous pressure and also acknowledge that what they revealed under that pressure matters. Remaining calm while others burn. You do not need to create pressure to see what it reveals. Life is generous enough with challenges that pressure arrives on its own, regularly, reliably, and without invitation. Your role is not to test people. Your role is simply to remain present enough to notice. And the best way to remain present during someone else's pressure response is to manage your own. When you remain calm while someone else is reacting, you gain a clarity that is impossible to access when you are caught up in the storm yourself. You see who panics. You see who blames. You see who steadies themselves. You see who reaches out for connection and who retreats into self-protection. Calmness in the presence of chaos is not indifference. It is the highest form of attention. It is choosing to keep your eyes open when every instinct says to close them. And what you see in those moments, with those open eyes, will inform your decisions more accurately than any conversation you will ever have. Chapter 7. The invisible glasses you never knew you were wearing. Now, let me ask you something, and I ask it with the kind of warmth that comes from having learned this the hard way myself. What if the reason you keep misjudging people has less to do with them and more to do with you? I know that is not the most comfortable question to sit with, but stay with me here, because this might be the most important chapter in our entire conversation. Because once you understand the filters through which you see people, you gain something that no amount of behavioral observation can give you. You gain the ability to correct your own vision. Most people believe they see the world objectively. They think their perception is a clear window, transparent and reliable, showing them reality as it actually is. But the truth is closer to this. Your perception is not a window. It is a pair of glasses, and those glasses have been shaped by every experience you have ever had, every heartbreak, every betrayal, every kindness, every disappointment, every moment of love and loss that left its fingerprint on the lens. You are not seeing people as they are. You are seeing people through who you are. And until you understand the prescription of your own glasses, you will continue to misread the world in ways that feel baffling and unfair. The mirror you accidentally hold up to everyone. The first and perhaps most powerful distortion is projection. Projection is the psychological equivalent of assuming that everyone's house looks like yours on the inside just because the exteriors are similar. If you are someone who values honesty deeply, you unconsciously assume that other people do too. If loyalty is sacred to you, you expect it to be sacred to everyone. If you communicate directly, you believe others will extend the same courtesy. And when they do not, you are not just disappointed, you are genuinely confused, because your mind cannot easily compute that someone operates from a completely different internal manual. Projection feels like empathy. It feels like assuming the best in people. And in many ways, it is a beautiful quality. It means you lead with your own values. It means you offer others the benefit of the doubt that you would want for yourself. But here is the cost. Projection erases differences. It paints everyone with the same brush. And when someone turns out to operate from a completely different set of values, the shock is not proportional to their behavior. It is proportional to the gap between your assumption and their reality. The wider the gap, the deeper the wound. This is why the most generous people are often the most blindsided, not because they are foolish, but because they projected their own generosity onto someone who was operating from an entirely different playbook. When hope picks up the paintbrush, the second great distortion is hope. And hope is a tricky one because it disguises itself as one of the noblest human qualities. Hope looks at ambiguous behavior and chooses the most generous interpretation. Hope sees a pattern of disappointment and says, maybe next time will be different. Hope hears an apology and believes it represents transformation, even when the same apology has been offered 7 times before with no change in behavior. Hope is not foolishness. Please hear me when I say that. Hope is emotional investment. When you care about someone, when you have built a vision of a future with them, when the relationship carries weight and meaning, your perception naturally bends toward preserving that investment. You downplay the evidence that threatens it. You amplify the moments that support it. You build a case for staying not because the evidence is strong, but because the alternative is grief. And grief, even the quiet, unnamed grief of letting go of how you thought things would be, is something the human heart will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid. So hope picks up the paintbrush and repaints reality. It turns red flags into minor misunderstandings. It transforms patterns into isolated incidents. It converts behavior into potential because potential feels better than evidence. But potential is a story about the future. Behavior is a fact about the present. And the present, however uncomfortable, is the only territory where wise decisions can be made. When pain feels like home. There is a third distortion that is perhaps the most heartbreaking of all, and I share it with tenderness because it touches something very deep. Sometimes we misjudge people because the wrong ones feel familiar. And familiarity, even painful familiarity, registers in the nervous system as safety. Think about this for a moment. If you grew up in an environment where love was unpredictable, where affection came and went without warning, where you had to earn attention or walk on eggshells to maintain connection, then unpredictability does not feel strange to you. It feels normal. It feels like home. And when you encounter someone whose behavior echoes that old pattern, someone who is warm one day and distant the next, someone who keeps you slightly off balance, someone whose affection requires constant maintenance, your nervous system does not raise an alarm. It says, "Oh, I recognize this. I know how to navigate this. This is familiar." Meanwhile, someone who offers steady, reliable, uncomplicated warmth might actually make you uncomfortable. Not because they are doing anything wrong, but because consistency feels foreign. It does not match the template your early experiences created. And so you might unconsciously dismiss the steady person as boring while chasing the unpredictable one, not because unpredictability is what you want, but because it is what your nervous system learned to call love. Recognizing this pattern is not about blaming your past or pathologizing your choices. It is about gently, compassionately understanding why your compass sometimes points toward storms instead of shelter. And that understanding, once it lands inside you, changes everything. Because you cannot correct a course you do not know you are on. When explanation replaces observation, here is a practical signpost to watch for in yourself. When you find yourself constantly explaining someone's behavior, not to them but to yourself, pause. That is a signal. Because behavior that aligns with words does not need explanation. It needs no defense, no context, no elaborate backstory to make it acceptable. It simply is what it is, and it is consistent with what was said. But behavior that contradicts words demands interpretation. It demands that you build a bridge between what you expected and what you received. And every time you build that bridge, you are using your own emotional energy as construction material. Ask yourself this: how many bridges have you built for someone who never once tried to meet you in the middle? Explanation is where misjudgment thrives, not because you are unintelligent, but because you are kind, because you want to understand, because you believe the best in people. And those are beautiful qualities. They simply need to be balanced with a willingness to let behavior speak for itself, without your editorial assistance. Clearing the lens. Correcting your perception does not require becoming suspicious. It does not require treating every relationship like a criminal investigation. It simply requires a shift, a gentle, deliberate shift from interpretation to observation. Instead of asking, "What did they mean by that?" ask, "What did they actually do?" Instead of wondering why this keeps happening, ask, "How often does this happen?" Instead of constructing elaborate explanations for disappointing behavior, allow the behavior to stand on its own and tell its own story. This shift is not about losing hope. It is about relocating it. Instead of hoping that someone will become who you want them to be, you begin hoping that you will have the courage to see them as they are. And that second kind of hope, the hope turned inward, toward your own clarity and strength, is a hope that never disappoints. Because here is the quiet revolution that happens when you clean your glasses. People do not become harder to love. They become easier to understand. And when understanding replaces confusion, when observation replaces projection, when clarity replaces hope-based distortion, something settles inside you like a stone finding the bottom of a still lake. You stop misjudging people, not because they change, but because you finally took off the glasses that were never showing you the truth in the first place. And with clear eyes and a compassionate heart, you are ready for something most people never reach. The ability to see people fully, love them appropriately, and protect yourself wisely, all at the same time. Chapter 8. Seeing everything without losing your warmth. There is a fear that lives quietly inside anyone who begins to understand human behavior at a deeper level. It does not announce itself loudly. It whispers, and what it whispers is this: if I learn to see too clearly, will I lose the ability to feel? If I notice the patterns, will I stop trusting anyone? If I recognize the performances, will I become cynical? If I understand the mechanics behind why people do what they do, will I lose the warmth that makes me who I am? I want to sit with you in that fear for a moment because it is a real fear, an honest one, and it deserves a real answer. No, clarity does not kill warmth. Clarity protects it. Think about it this way. Imagine you have a garden, a beautiful garden that you have poured your heart into, full of flowers you planted with your own hands. Now, for years, you left the gate wide open. Anyone could walk in. Some people came in and admired the flowers. Some people picked a few without asking. And some people walked straight through the beds, crushing things you had spent seasons growing, and then left without looking back. After a while, you started to wonder if the problem was the garden itself. Maybe I should stop planting. Maybe I should let it all go to weeds. Maybe caring this much is the mistake. But the garden was never the problem. The open gate was the problem. Learning to read people is not about tearing up the garden. It is about building a gate that you control, one that opens generously for those who walk gently and closes firmly against those who do not. Your warmth is not your weakness. Your warmth without discernment was the vulnerability. And discernment, the kind that comes from understanding behavior clearly, does not replace warmth. It gives warmth a safe place to live. The false wall between empathy and awareness. Somewhere along the way, many people absorbed an unspoken belief that seeing someone's flaws and caring about them are mutually exclusive. That if you notice the cracks, you cannot also hold the person with tenderness. That awareness and compassion live on opposite sides of a wall, and you must choose which side to stand on. But this is a false wall, and the sooner it comes down, the more freely you will move through your relationships. Empathy without awareness is a candle in a windstorm. It burns bright and beautiful, but it has no protection. It gets blown out again and again, and eventually the person holding the match gets too exhausted to keep relighting it. This is how compassionate people burn out, not because they cared too much, but because they cared without seeing clearly. They poured their energy into people and situations that were never going to give back, and they mistook that one-sided pouring for love. Awareness without empathy, on the other hand, is a flashlight with no warmth. It illuminates everything but touches nothing. It sees patterns, predicts behavior, anticipates disappointment, but it does not connect. And connection, real human connection, is the entire point. The goal is neither. The goal is what happens when you hold both at the same time. When you can look at someone and think, I see your limitations, I understand your patterns, and I still choose to treat you with kindness, within boundaries that protect us both. That is not coldness. That is the most mature form of love there is, where coldness actually comes from. Here is something that might surprise you. Coldness almost never comes from understanding too much. It comes from being hurt too many times without understanding why. When someone experiences repeated betrayal, confusion, and emotional exhaustion without any framework for making sense of it, the nervous system eventually makes a decision on its own. It says, enough. And it builds a wall, not a thoughtful boundary with a gate, but a thick, indiscriminate wall that keeps everything out, the painful and the beautiful alike. That wall is what people call being cold. But it is not a choice born from wisdom. It is a reflex born from unprocessed pain. The person behind the wall did not become cold because they saw people too clearly. They became cold because they never had the tools to see clearly at all, and so they were blindsided over and over until their system simply shut down to prevent further damage. Understanding human behavior prevents this. When you can see patterns early, you adjust before the damage accumulates. When you can read behavior accurately, you do not invest years in someone who was showing you the truth from month one. When you can distinguish between who someone is and who you hope they would be, you protect yourself from the kind of devastation that turns warm people into guarded ones. Clarity is not the enemy of warmth. Clarity is what keeps warmth alive across a lifetime. Seeing without carrying. There is a skill that sits at the heart of everything we have discussed, and it is this: learning to observe without absorbing. You can notice someone's insecurity without making it your project to fix. You can recognize someone's pattern of avoidance without chasing them into the spaces they keep running toward. You can see someone's pain without climbing inside it and calling it your new home. This is not detachment. This is discernment, and the difference between the two is everything. Detachment says, I do not care. Discernment says, I care, and I also recognize what is mine to carry and what is not. Think of yourself as someone standing beside a river. The river is another person's emotional world, their fears, their wounds, their unresolved history. You can stand beside that river with compassion. You can acknowledge its power. You can even dip your hand in and feel its temperature. But you do not have to jump in and let the current pull you under. You can remain on the bank, feet on solid ground, heart open, eyes clear. This ability, the ability to witness without drowning, is what allows you to stay warm in a world full of complicated people. It is what prevents empathy from becoming self-destruction. It is what lets you love people without losing yourself in the process. Boundaries are not barbed wire. Let me say something about boundaries, because this word gets misunderstood so often that it almost needs rescuing. Boundaries are not punishment. They are not rejection. They are not a way of telling someone they are bad or wrong or unwelcome. Boundaries are the architecture of sustainable connection. They are the walls of your house, not meant to keep people out, but meant to define the space where healthy interaction can happen. When you read people accurately, boundaries form naturally. You do not overshare with someone who trades in gossip, not because you are cold, but because you understand the pattern. You do not lean on someone who has shown you they disappear under pressure, not because you are holding a grudge, but because you are honoring what their behavior has told you. You do not seek emotional safety from someone whose own emotional foundation is cracked, not because you judge them, but because you recognize that they cannot offer what they do not possess. These adjustments are not cruelty. They are intelligence. They allow you to remain kind, open, and genuinely caring while also remaining whole. And wholeness, your wholeness, is not negotiable. It is the foundation from which everything meaningful in your life grows. Chapter 9. The Still Point in a Spinning Room. We have traveled a long road together through these pages. We have talked about performance and pattern, about silence and pressure, about the filters that distort our vision, and the insecurities that leak through the cracks. Now, I want to bring it all together with something that may be the most important idea of all. The person who sees the most in any room is not the one talking the most. It is the one who is still. Stillness is not passivity. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is the most concentrated form of attention a human being's capable of. It is what happens when you stop performing, stop reacting, stop chasing validation, and simply allow yourself to be present with whatever is unfolding around you. And from that place of stillness, everything becomes visible. You see the colleague who laughs along with the group, but whose eyes carry something heavy. You notice the friend who changes the subject every time the conversation drifts toward anything real. You feel the shift in energy when someone walks into a room carrying resentment they have not yet named. You catch the almost invisible flinch when a topic touches a wound that no one else noticed. These things are not hidden. They are simply moving at a frequency that only stillness can detect. Noise misses them. Reactivity misses them. The constant chatter of managing your own performance misses them entirely. But stillness catches them all. Why reacting costs more than you think. Every time you react impulsively to someone's behavior, you pay a price. Not just emotionally, but informationally. Because in the moment of reaction, your attention shifts from observing them to managing yourself. You lose the vantage point. You step off the bank and into the river. And once you are in the current, you cannot see where it is flowing. Reactive people believe they are being authentic. I am just being real. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I say what I feel. And there is something admirable about emotional honesty. But there is a difference between expressing emotion and being controlled by it. When emotion controls your response, it also controls what you see. Anger narrows vision. Fear distorts proportion. The need to be right filters out information that contradicts your position. And in all that narrowing and distorting and filtering, you miss the very signals that would have served you most. The calm observer does not suppress emotion. They create a space between feeling and responding. A pause, a breath, a moment of deliberate stillness where the emotion is acknowledged but not obeyed. And in that space, choice is born. The choice to respond instead of react. The choice to see instead of assume. The choice to move with intention instead of impulse. That space, tiny and invisible as it may seem, is where wisdom lives, the quiet authority of presence. Have you ever been in a room where someone spoke very little but somehow commanded the most attention? Not through volume, not through dominance, not through any visible effort at all, simply through the quality of their presence. That is what stillness creates. It creates a kind of gravity. People are drawn to those who are centered, not because centered people demand attention, but because their steadiness creates a contrast with the noise around them. In a world where everyone is performing, the person who is simply present becomes magnetic. This is not a technique. It is not something you perform. It is something you develop by practicing the very skills we have been exploring together. When you stop projecting, you become more present. When you stop chasing validation, you become more grounded. When you stop reacting to every provocation, you become more still. And that stillness radiates outward in ways you may never fully see, but others will always feel. The calm observer does not need to announce their awareness. They embody it. And embodied awareness, the kind that lives in your posture, your timing, your gaze, and your silence, is the rarest and most respected form of power. What you now carry with you. As we reach the end of this journey together, I want to reflect something back to you. Not a lesson, not a technique, but something deeper. You have always had the ability to read people. Every human being does. What you may not have had until now was the permission to trust what you saw, the framework to organize what you sensed, the language to describe what you felt in those moments when something was off, but you could not quite name it. Now you have that language, and with it comes a kind of freedom that is difficult to describe but impossible to forget once you feel it. You no longer need to replay conversations at midnight, searching for the clue you missed. The clues were never in the words. They were in the patterns. And now you know where to look. You no longer need to chase explanations from people whose behavior has already answered your questions. Behavior does not stutter. It does not equivocate. It simply repeats, patiently, consistently, until someone is willing to listen. You no longer need to carry the exhausting weight of trying to figure everyone out through conversation alone. You have something far more reliable now. You have observation. And observation, quiet and steady and unhurried, sees what urgency always misses. Living from the clear place. Understanding people clearly does not give you superiority. It gives you something far better. It gives you peace. Peace from the endless cycle of confusion and disappointment. Peace from the exhausting habit of explaining away behavior that was actually quite straightforward. Peace from the painful pattern of investing your deepest trust in people whose behavior was quietly telling you not to. This peace does not make you hard. It does not make you distant. It does not close your heart. If anything, it opens your heart more fully, because now you can choose where to direct your love with wisdom instead of desperation. You can invest your trust in people who have earned it through consistent action, not charming promises. You can open yourself to connection that is mutual, respectful, and grounded in reality, rather than fantasy. You will still encounter difficult people. You will still be surprised occasionally. You will still have moments where emotion clouds your vision and you temporarily forget everything you have learned. That is not failure. That is being human. The difference is that now, when the fog clears, you have a compass. You know how to find your way back to clarity, and each time you return, the path gets shorter. As you move forward from here, carry this with you. You do not need to control anyone. You do not need to change anyone. You do not need to confront every inconsistency or expose every performance. You simply need to see clearly and then choose accordingly. See the patterns without bitterness. Notice the signals without judgment. Read the silences without fear. And above all, remain warm. Remain open. Remain the kind of person who walks through the world with both eyes open and both arms ready to embrace what is real and release what is not. Because the calm observer does not just understand people. The calm observer understands themselves. And that understanding, quiet, steady, hard-won, and deeply compassionate, is the foundation of a life lived not in reaction to the world, but in genuine, grounded relationship with it. The noise will continue. People will perform. Masks will be worn. Words will contradict actions. Insecurity will leak. Pressure will reveal. Silence will speak. But you, standing in the middle of all of it, clear-eyed and warm-hearted, will no longer be confused. You will understand. And understanding, real understanding, the kind that does not flinch, does not harden, and does not look away, is the quietest and most unshakable power a human being can hold. Carry it gently, use it wisely, and never, ever let it cost you your kindness. That is the whole point.